Hello, sisters and brothers. Our devotional for today, for June 5, is a reflection on My Utmost for His Highest, a series of devotionals written and compiled by Oswald Chambers. You can always find the link for the daily devotional at utmost.org. And today's devotional is titled God's Assurance. And for this, Chambers picks up on the passage from Hebrews chapter 13 and expands on the thoughts from yesterday about how God will never forsake us. So I'm going to read Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So we say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" God's assurance. He himself has said, so we may boldly say, from Hebrews 13, 5 and 6. My assurance is to be built upon God's assurance to me. God says, "I will never leave you," so that then I may boldly say, "The Lord is my helper, I will not fear." In other words, I will not be obsessed with apprehension. This does not mean that I will not be tempted to fear, but I will remember God's words of assurance. I will be full of courage like a child who strives to reach the standard his father has set for him. The faith of many people begins to falter when apprehension enters their thinking and they forget the meaning of God's assurance. They forget to take a deep spiritual breath. The only way to remove the fear from our lives is to listen to God's assurance for us. What are you fearing? Whatever it may be, you are not a coward about it. You are determined to face it, yet you still have a feeling of fear. When it seems that there is nothing and no one to help you, say to yourself, "But the Lord is my helper this very moment, even in my present circumstance." Are you learning to listen to God before you speak, or are you saying things and then trying to make God's word fit what you have said? Take hold of the Father's assurance, and then say with strong courage, "I will not fear." It does not matter what evil or wrong may be in our way, because He himself has said, "I will never leave you." Human frailty is another thing that gets between God's words of assurance and our own words and thoughts. When we realize how feeble we are in facing difficulties, the difficulties become like giants. We become like grasshoppers, and God seems to be non-existent. But remember God's assurance to us, "I will never forsake you." Have we learned to sing after hearing God's keynote? Are we continually filled with enough courage to say, "The Lord is my helper," or are we yielding to fear? So as we think about God's assurance, and a message that we desperately need to hear right now, what is getting in our way of hearing God's assurance? Why is our fear and our trouble and our anxiety drowning out the words of God? And I've always had a certain issue with people who say we should not fear. Fear is normal, right? That's a response. If I am walking in the woods and there's a bear, I'm going to have fear, okay? If someone breaks into my home, I'm going to have fear. I need to find assurance inside of that. I need to find assurance in spite of that, right? Because we are going to face difficulties. The Bible tells us that. We're going to face trials and tribulations. And so it's not to say, well, you just go forward and you pay no attention to what you're feeling. It's an acknowledgement that you have a real reason to have fear and caution, but you remember that there's never a time that God is not with you. Those are the words that we have to remember. Those are the words that we have to stand on like a rock and hold on to His promises. There are some links and places where you can find lists of God's promises, and sometimes we just need to read over those and read them aloud and say, "This is what God has promised to me." But especially this one, that God will never leave us nor forsake us. We're going to face giants in our lives. What do? We stand on that assurance. We know that God is with us. He will never leave us nor forsake us, even in the valley of the shadow of death. He will be with us. He is our rod and our staff to comfort us. So acknowledge what you're feeling. Acknowledge that this is difficult and challenging. But remember the words of God, that He will never leave you, never forsake you. And then hold on to that assurance. Thank you as always for listening. Be safe and stay well.